Learning somebody else's language is a good idea if you want to improve communication. One of the languages that people who were raised on English know is Spanish, or rather, one of the languages many people that were raised to speak English would like to learn is Spanish, right? So Spanish is often thought of, at least in these times, Spanish is often thought of as one of those languages that would be good to learn to improve the way we communicate with society in general, right? And so I was reflecting on that because some people also want to learn Mandarin, right? Because knowing Mandarin or knowing some Chinese dialects could prove useful in business, could prove useful in careers, but there is another language that you know that is spoken by some very fluently, but in many cases is looked down upon, and that is what I call corporate. Speaking the language of corporate and speaking formal language. I used to be quite fluent in formal language and corporate language, but I got out of practice with it, and it doesn't come as easy to me as it did when I was in my 20s. But I was thinking about all of this while I'm looking at careers, and I'm looking at business. I'm looking at what makes people successful. How do people move up in organizations? How do they advance in business dealings? And I noticed that, yes, it is true. There are indeed executives that speak very casually. They're very, what people would say, down to earth and approachable. But I don't think that means that speaking corporate or speaking formal English and speaking in a much more organized way is any less accessible or approachable if the intent behind it, the energy that the person puts out, doesn't communicate that. And so I didn't think about that when I was in my 20s and 30s. I didn't think about that at all. I accepted the explanation of those that said you shouldn't talk like that on face value. But what I realized is the criticism of corporate language, the criticism of more formal ways of talking. And this is not just European, right? It's not just European. In Africa and India and China, in a variety of developed cultures around the world, in what we call Latin America, there are formal versions of the languages that people learn in those societies. So in China, there's a formal version of Chinese that certain members of the Chinese society speak. There's a formal Chinese. There's a formal Japanese. There are more formal African languages within an African culture, right? There's the more common everyday way of talking in African language, specific African languages, and then there are the more formal ways of talking those languages. It depends on what type of job you're in, what type of role you're in, and in some cases, whether or not you're in an inherited role. such as a monarchy, a chieftain, or a tribal um, um, position that has evolved over time. And, that cuts across many societies, right? But in America and in Western Europe, there's definitely a formal language. And those that have not been initiated into that language, or who have felt excluded by those who speak that language and speak that way, have associated those microaggressions and passive aggressive expressions with a certain way of talking and expressing oneself, right? And I went on a huge tangent there just as context to say that sometimes we judge things on the surface, and we embrace other people's judgments. So for us to try to fit in, we might say, okay, they see something wrong with somebody talking like that, and I certainly don't want to be judged that way. So I'm going to go along with what they said on how somebody talks, and I am going to not even try to talk that way or go in that direction. All the while, you are handicapping and undermining your long-term ability to enter into and affiliate with the higher levels of society, and to gain access to greater opportunity, business deals, and not even business deals, higher positions or positions on boards, certain nonprofit and charitable initiatives. It just goes all the way across the spectrum. And you can exclude yourself and forfeit your ability to work in that way, trying to embrace a point of view against a certain communication style that is widely adopted and accepted in a certain part of society that deals with economics and finance, and that deals with special projects, that deals with policy, that deals with decisions that affect the lives of large numbers of people, or just simply affects your life and those and the lives of those that are close to you. And so that's what happens to, I think that happens to many people when they're younger, is they accept the wisdom of the crowd. They accept the wisdom of the larger numbers of people that surround them, that tell them that, yeah, you need to fit in with us. I've seen these trends actually play out in advertising over a long period of time. Remember when, and I'm just going to use a name, and I'm not using this name to insult this individual, right? But remember when Mark Zuckerberg wore all black all the time, right? And that lady from Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, she wore black all the time. Remember their justification for that? Remember when Mark Zuckerberg was wearing a hoodie all the time, and then he switched over to a suit at some point? See, there are trends here, right? There are things that are trendy, they are fashionable, but they are not the actual expressions that you are going to see used long term in order to operate in a more successful way. Let me take this down a different road. So many people complain that they haven't succeeded in life. And I'm one to talk, am I? But many people complain that they haven't succeeded in life. And they may have even accepted where they ended up. You know, if they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, they may accept where they ended up. To that I say it's never too late. It isn't. Even if you got 5 years of life left, it's never too late. At least if you made a substantial change in the last 5 years of your life, at least in your mind and that of your eternal spirit, it was worth it. It was worth something. Okay? So, but you may have people that feel like they haven't gotten where they could be, where others have gotten, right? And they have no motivation or no incentive to change course, right? And what I mean by that is changing course means that changing course is relevant where you actually do want to elevate. It might be in style to say otherwise, because to downplay wanting to succeed, to downplay it, can prevent people from becoming jealous of you. It can prevent people from wanting to come against you because they might develop some insecurities. They might have some insecurities. And you instinctively know you don't want to trigger those insecurities. And it is wise not to tell people your plans. But you can take trying to downplay your path to success too far, where you lose practice. See, if you spend too many years trying to talk common, be common, conduct yourself common, all of that, even if you were raised differently, this is how I describe life in general. Even if you're a very sociable person and you are very good at working with people, that in itself is a skill. And if you've always been good with people from the time you were 16 years old to the time you're 40 years old, and you have a large collection of friends you talk to on a regular basis, and you just chat it up with people throughout the day, all through the day, even if it looks like you're not working, you are working, because you're continuing to develop that skill of being able to connect and bridge with people, right? That's what I mean by that. And it's the same case for communication, or what I call talking corporate, right? The more years you put into that, the better at it you become. Even if you reach the level of what they call unconscious competence. Unconscious competence. But you just get better and better and better. And you think there's a ceiling. You actually can see some people get to a point in your life, they might become a senior executive. And, you know, they're really good. They're really good, but they stop. And you can feel that they feel like they've invested enough. And they run $100 million enterprise. Now, this tip I picked up from Alex Hormozy. He's very widely known in social media, Alex Hormozy. And he says something that really got me thinking a few months ago. He was trying to find the right director for one of his businesses. And he went through a process of interviewing different candidates from referrals. But they wasn't quite the right fit. They were missing this or missing that, missing this and missing that. But he took the opportunity to see who would they recommend, who do they know. And so he did the network graph. He worked through their networks and then that network's networks until he could find the person that very few people talk about, but are at a very high level and have an exceptional reputation. And those were the rare people that could get you to $1 billion level, right? But even once you get to that $1 billion level, and the point is there's always a new level. $100 billion level is different from $1 billion level. And $500 billion level is different from $100 billion level. And if you want $1 trillion company and you eventually get there, that's going to be totally different from the person that gets to 100 trillion, if that's even possible in terms of the economy and the treasury and how currency is valuated, and all of that, right? GDP, the person that can get to $100 trillion, that's going to be a completely different person, company, situation than anything you've ever seen. But the person that can manage that successfully is completely different than somebody that can run $1 million operation, right? The communication is going to be different. The writing is going to be different. The thought process is going to be different. And so that's what I'm saying, is that it's worthwhile to learn another language, even if that is a language within the language that you know in your society. In this case, English. There are different levels of English. Everybody is fluent with English in terms of speaking it, right? Everybody can speak English, and a large number of people can understand most of what it is said in English, even big words. So you may not actually know the dictionary definition of what they call a large word, a large vocabulary word, but people can still understand what you mean when you say that word, because the US education system, at least as far as I know it was when I was coming up, the US education system taught you how to interpret sentences in terms of language comprehension based on how words are used and how sentences are structured. And so there's always a chance for you to elevate your language and not lose your audience if you approach it the right way. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. I was schooled on that indirectly by watching 19 Keys. There's this gentleman, his name is 19 Keys. And he is on this YouTube channel called Earn Your Leisure. And 19 Keys would interview these guests. And I would notice something with some of his guests. His guests are very well known by the community that 19 Keys vibes with the most. And at the same time, some of his guests have a vocabulary and verbal level that doesn't necessarily make them look smart, because some people can use words in a way to make themselves look smart. But these individuals, you'll watch a 2-hour or a 3-hour interview, and they're literally using words that are legitimate, big, larger words in that conversation. They actually fit, the words fit. And you could tell this person has studied, they're well researched into what they know, and the audience finds it, the audience accepts it. It adds to their credibility, you see? So, you can actually level up your communication. You can level up this language that we call speaking corporate. And you can see how the people that run billion-dollar companies, how they talk, and how the people that they surround themselves talk. And it's not true that if you graduate from college, you will automatically talk that way. It's not true at all. But because I've seen it, I've seen it with my own eyes. But it is the case that these billion-dollar leaders, they do bring in people that are going to operate in a certain way, um, not just verbally, but also in terms of protocol, demeanor, and the lifestyle that they're inclined towards. That's going to fit in with and support the very rhythm of how that organization functions and advances. So there's much to take in this conversation about that, and I just want to say that yes, um, in terms of career advancement and working um, at a at another level, yes, you will occasionally find somebody that will criticize you to your face. This happened to me this year in 2024. I was interviewing for a job, and the hiring manager, um, towards the end of the interview, said I use a lot of big words, and I used them naturally. They just flowed right out of me, just like like a rapper spins lyrics, right? But I was talking in an elevated corporate way, and you know, my sense was everybody in the room that I was talking to, they all graduated from college. They understand literature. They understand English. And see, the thing about larger words is that they make your communication more concise, right? Because you could take an hour to say what you can say in 5 minutes using a more expanded vocabulary. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just go for it because you know you should understand what I'm saying. But in this particular interview, the hiring manager, not HR, but the hiring manager, um, may have felt a little way about how I carried myself, is what I can feedback on looking back. But yeah, when they criticized my use of larger language and knowing the history of computers and knowing the field extremely well, and you know, the energy in the room changed, and I knew that that particular position um, wasn't going to be mine. And it took me by surprise, and it has taken me months to reflect on that. But I came to the conclusion that the issue wasn't me, the issue was them. The issue was this individual and their own security, um, because you know they were faced with someone that was very competent, very knowledgeable, and you know, and so I was like, okay, don't let someone discourage you from advancing your path um, in the direction that you've seen others do or achieve. You know, and you know, executives that I've seen, they get where they get to for a reason. By the way, I was able to find out that that individual that criticized me is more than likely resigning their position, um, and so you know you just learn these things, and not for a bad reason, you know, for a good reason, but there were other factors at play in that situation months ago. Um, but I think a large part of it was, you know, um, sometimes you are trying to develop yourself and level yourself up in a way, and stay leveled up in a way that others, um, when they look at themselves, are like, this makes me uncomfortable. And sometimes you can work with that and work around that, and sometimes you can't. But you should strive to be yourself always. And as you level up, that becomes the new you, the more improved version of you. And do everything you can not to surrender that to other people's comfort.